What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Don't Call It a Comeback. This is episode 5, and today I am answering your questions about injury and recovery. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, comment, and share it with your friends. I really appreciate that. So this is a bit of a long one because I wanted to make sure to cover all of the questions that I received. Feel free to ask me more questions, I'll make more videos, and enjoy. First question. Do you take a do as I say, not as I do approach to niggles? I guess the short answer is no. I generally do as I tell my athletes to do. Let's see. This is obviously a more complicated question than what it seems to be on the surface. For me, I think one of the things that informs this question is the difference between pain, soreness, niggles, that kind of thing, right? So I have had a pretty injury-free career. This is the longest I've ever been out. It's only been 11 weeks. And generally, if I feel something that is abnormal, that's not muscle soreness, I go straight to see a body worker or a PT or somebody who can assess the situation, so that I'm not kind of putting myself in the situation where I'm saying, oh, I'm fine, it's no big deal, which I think is what the gist of this question is differentiating that. So generally speaking, if I wake up and I'm a little bit sore, I'm like, okay, I just worked hard, right? Soreness is part of adaptation. Soreness that lingers, not so great. Weird pains, not so great. I generally think that the difference between like pro level athletes and amateur athletes is the fact that pro level athletes generally go, I feel something, I'm going to get it addressed. They don't like wait around to see how it manifests. And that makes a big difference, right? I feel like over the course of my career, I have avoided a lot of injuries because of that approach. I don't generally think just wishing pain away is a good approach. With this particular injury, I didn't run with a niggle. I had sore muscles, but I wasn't super concerned about tight muscles. I was aware that I had wanted to take days off and that I was tired. I didn't like that I was sore, but my coach at the time was like, no, let's push forward. So I actually didn't run through a niggle that caused this. I actually stopped as soon as the pain came up, and I didn't subsequently run any further than I had pain. I literally, for the first 2 months, didn't go farther than a couple of houses. Because I would test it, I was told to test it, and I would test it. The moment pain came up, stop, instantly. I think that saved me in the long run. So, do as I say, also as I do, I guess is the gist. The other thing that I should talk about is my previous injury with a broken foot, which I did run on. That was a misdiagnosis. I was told I was fine, and so I kept running. And I was told that I would have pain, arthritis-like pain, because I had broken the tarsal coalition in my foot, which, according to the doctor, was what we wanted, and so I would have arthritis-like pain. After a couple months, I realized that the pain was pretty intense, and so I went and saw a different doctor, who then diagnosed me with a full fracture, and I immediately stopped running, had surgery, got it fixed. So do as I say and as I do. I hope that answers your question. Any tips for managing fear of reoccurrence? Oh man, this is a tough one. I was just thinking about this today because I'm just starting back with running and things are sore, and I'm hyper aware of phantom pain and where the pain is and if the pain's going to come back and what it means to be sore, etc. Right? We can drive ourselves crazy. I think to manage the fear, we need to kind of separate it out to say, is this an irrational fear or is this caution, right? So when you're returning from injury, you obviously need to be cautious, especially with things that are not well defined in terms of reoccurrence, such as stress fractures, right? I mean, there is a possibility that you could start running and have the injury come back. I think the way that I address this is like having a clear plan with your healthcare practitioner and your coach that let you know, here's what we do, here's the steps that we're taking, this is how we're doing it, and this is what happens if you have pain. I think if we're left to our own devices, it can often be this like, should I, shouldn't I kind of game. And that is, I think, where those injuries can creep back in, is if we're like, well, it's not that bad, right? Like you can rationalize a lot, which is, I think, actually how we end up injured in the first place, is we're like, it'll be fine. And as we're coming out of injury, we're really excited to get back. And honestly, I think it comes down to being honest with yourself. Like, am I really in pain? Can I proceed to the next step? Am I doing everything it takes to return to run? Have I been cleared to run? I think we need these concrete things where it says, okay, I am healthy enough according to not my own opinion, somebody else's opinion, your doctor's opinion, your PT's opinion, to start running. And then really, really, really being honest with yourself about how it feels. And if you're ready, if you're doing everything, I think sometimes you have to really look at, like, are you doing all your PT exercises? Are you resting enough? Or are you just really antsy to get back to running, right? Being antsy to get back to running is not a diagnostic criteria to get back to running, unfortunately. I think with the fear, you have to kind of balance that out with the realities of your injury. So I think for me, the way I'm battling the fear is having clear parameters. So it's basically like, I get to proceed to the next step as long as I don't have pain. If I have pain, I have to stop. I mean, that's the reality. And I think having it be defined for you clearly before you start running is really helpful, because it's going to help you not get into that trap of wishy-washiness and worry. I also think that one of the things that helps with getting over the fear is like knowing that in your injury recovery, you have done everything in your power, not just to address the specific spot of the injury, but to look at your whole system and be like, hey, have I addressed what caused this, right? Have you looked at your nutrition? Have you looked at your lifestyle? Have you looked at your stress? Have you looked at your training? Have you had somebody look at your gait? Like, I think that some of the confidence you can have with coming back from an injury is knowing that you are not just going back into the same state of training and living that you were injured in. Because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I think part of the fear is relieved through knowing that you have put in the necessary changes in order to be healthier moving forward. And that, I mean, comes down to being honest with yourself. And I think that's really hard. And I think part of the reason I think it's super valuable to have a team, have your PT, have your doctor, have your coach, have your nutritionist, like all of these people, helping to reflect back to you that you are indeed ready and that you can proceed down this path. And then, it's going to take a little bit of a leap of faith. I mean, that's just part of it. I think having a smart, clear plan is one part, but also just having a little bit of faith and taking your time. Okay, the next question is, how do you not yell at everyone around you when you're injured? it's a tough one because being injured is really frustrating. I guess the advice is it's never a good idea to yell at other people because you're injured. I think what it comes down to is examining what those reasons are that you want to yell at other people. One, you're removing something positive in your life, right? You're missing the endorphins, you're missing your socializing, your exercise, that kind of stuff, right? So it's a drastic change in what you're doing, and that can result in, different things going on in your body. Two, there's all the emotions that come with the fear, the anxieties of being injured, not knowing, how long you'll be out, not knowing what the proper path is, all of that things. Even when you have a straightforward diagnosis, just having this thing that's very important to you taken away is really hard. And that's all super valid. I think the reality is that you need to find a way to channel that. And for me, I do it a couple ways. One, I focus on what I can do, and I take, joy in being able to cross train, even if I don't love riding a bike or like going on walks, right? Like I think about what I can do and I try to get out of that what I can. And also just having a good support network, so that you can talk about your feelings before it gets to yelling. I sometimes feel like yelling comes out of not really having the opportunity to speak about your feelings. And so you just keep it inside and pent up, and then they lash out at somebody about something that's not related to your injury. So whether that's your partner, a friend, a therapist, your coach, like I think that processing the emotions and the reality of being injured is super important to kind of keep you balanced in that time and to keep the anger at bay. Like your feelings are super valid when you're injured, right? Like it's not like a happy time, but I think having a place to process that is super important. Okay, the question is, how do you know when to stop? I kind of touched on this a little bit in the do as I say, not as I do question. This is a tough one. This is really about getting to know yourself and also about making good choices. One, I think a lot of us know when something doesn't feel right. And it's really easy to rationalize, oh, whatever, it's just a little thing, it's just a little whatever. My rule of thumb is if it's painful enough that I am changing my form, stop. If it is painful enough that I'm feeling it when I am not running, I stop. If it's painful enough that it's persisting, I stop. Ultimately, you're way better off taking preemptive days off, like a couple days off early when you feel something, versus continuing to run on it and then having to take weeks off. I mean, that's kind of the balance I use. Is like, am I running through something that would be cured by a little bit of rest? And why wouldn't I rest? Like, it's very preventative, and a lot of injuries could be resolved with like a itty bitty amount of rest. But the problem is that we're like, oh, it's not that bad. Everybody runs with pain, blah, 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 blah. And we rationalize it in part because we are afraid of stopping running, even though the best thing to do for like small injuries is to stop running preventatively. So, I mean, I've gotten pretty good at knowing my body and how I feel. I generally am like, okay, if I'm a little bit sore, I'll run through a bit of soreness because soreness is part and parcel of running. But if I have pain that pops up and doesn't resolve with body work or stretching, or it doesn't go away in a couple of days, I definitely try to take rest days early and get, my care team on top of it. I think the rule of thumb is, it's like, if you think if you're questioning whether or not you should stop, you should probably stop. Like I said, preventative days off in the long run, like they're drops in the bucket, and they will help you immensely from having more serious injuries. Okay, last question. Are running injuries inevitable, or what is the best way to prevent them? I guess there's a saying that says the only things certain in this life are death and taxes. So from a theoretical perspective, running injuries could be avoided. They're not inevitable, right? There's a lot of things that we could do to prevent injuries, or at least put ourselves in the best possible position not to be injured. Obviously in practice, like the issue is so complicated and so individual that it is hard to completely avoid injuries, in part because each person's going to respond to the combination of stimulus so differently. So what are some of the things you can do to avoid injury? The things you have to consider is that everything that you do in your life has an impact on your running and your running health. So, unless you are doing everything right in every possible category, your odds of getting injured are increased, right? So we're talking about nutrition, sleep, stress, stretching, mobility, prehab, rehab, and we haven't even gotten to the running part, right? So all of your life outside of running makes a difference. So to avoid running injuries, you could focus on those aspects, and where you have room to improve, right? Are you not sleeping well enough? That's a great way to prevent injury. When it comes to running and running specificity, you'd think if there was a way to avoid injury, pros would be the ones that wouldn't get injured. The reality is, I actually think that amateur athletes have more opportunity to stay away from injuries because amateur athletes don't necessarily have to take as many gambles in their training as pros do, right? So pros are trying to squeak out the tiny, tiny little top percent, right? With amateurs, the best way to stay injury-free is to have a coach and have a program that is tailored to you, that is taking into consideration all of those factors I mentioned, your training age, your training life, like what your goals are, and really like keep the reins pretty tight on you and keep a really good objective view about what you're doing, right? I think that a good program and following a good program that's specifically tailored to you goes a long way. But part of that goes back to the question previously, where it's like we have to be honest with ourselves, honest with our coaches about how we're feeling so that those programs can actually work. I think that everyone, pros have to take the risk to kind of get that last bit of payoff. But I think amateurs take risks too, such as not taking days off when they feel something, running through pain. So all of those factors are things that can be eliminated, right? You can take preemptive days off. You can back off when you feel something. You can listen to your body. That will go a long way. I think, a lot of running injuries are overuse injuries, and that comes out of our inability to step back and be like, hey, a little bit less now equals more later. For me, I have the genetic gift of being super durable. In my career, I have not had that many injuries. I had 2 injuries, which were because of trauma. So One was with the removal of my IUD a couple of years ago, which ruined my pelvic floor, and one was when I Supermaned while sprinting downhill super fast. The other two injuries are training error. They are both born out of what I talked about, like taking those risks. And, you know, in hindsight, I probably didn't need to take those risks because it was a gamble, right? The first injury I had that led to my foot breaking, the training error was that we added too much vert in a short amount of time. And it turned out that I had a physical limitation in my ankle, which caused that to cause me severe issues. And this current injury is also an overtraining error because we did not rest after my 50K. So that is avoidable, right? So I think if we really slow it down, I don't really think injuries are inevitable. I do think that it takes a lot of work and self-awareness to stay away from injuries. Another thing I should mention is that, you know, I said I'm durable. Some people who come into the sport, if they were in a different sport, they didn't grow up running. I didn't grow up running, but I grew up really athletic. People can come into the sport and they just kind of start doing, and you see injuries pop up. And sometimes some people, you know, you talk about injury prone people, sometimes that is, you have to look at what they are doing and how their body's moving in order to prevent the injuries, right? So if somebody is chronically injured, perhaps what they need to do is have somebody watch them run and figure out physiologically what is happening to their body when they run that is causing this cascade of problems, right? That's not going to be solved by like better sleep or different shoes, right? You have to look at how the system is working. But in order to be more robust, different things have to be addressed for different people. So while the answer is no, injuries are not inevitable, I think we have to look at our individual lives and look at the factors that are increasing our risk for injury. And, you know, start addressing those things in order to create a more hardy or durable running.